me say, also has been said a couple times, but how much I enjoyed, appreciated, encouraged by the Leadership Summit that we just came back from. Not just the information that was shared, but also the challenges that were issued. I'm excited to see what God might be able to do with the way we respond to those challenges. So this morning, I want to spend today not so much in a recap of the weekend, for sure, not a continuation of the weekend, but I want to share a couple thoughts, I guess sort of in the wake of what so many of us men just came off of. And I want to begin by showing you a cartoon panel by Gary Larson. Gary Larson, of course, drew the Far Side for years. He's been retired for a couple decades now, but they're still wildly popular. This particular panel is considered by most to be probably his most famous panel ever. Most of you have seen it. It is a picture of a little boy standing at the door of the Midvale School for the Gifted, pushing against a door that is clearly labeled "Pull." And I think the reason probably why that panel is so famous isn't because it's so funny, because it's really not that laugh out loud funny. And it's ironic, but I don't think that's what makes it iconic. I think it's because it's just so relatable. I mean, we've all been there, right? A picture of someone doing exactly the opposite of what they're told to do and wondering why they're not getting the results they expect to get. We've all been there, right? We've all wondered, why am I not getting the results that I'm expecting to get? Maybe it's because we're not doing what we've been told to do. So this morning, I want to talk to you a little bit about expectations. You know, we talk a lot in church especially about our expectations from God. What can I expect from God? And I love to talk about that. I love to talk about unconditional love, undeserved grace. I like to talk about forgiveness and acceptance, healing and redemption. I like to talk about all the things that I can expect from God. But what can God expect from me? And by extrapolation, what can the church expect from me? A little more personal, what can the Bay Area Church of Christ expect from me? Not me as a preacher, but me as a part of this family. What can the church expect from me? Now, I talk to a lot of people that show up here, and they're kind of checking out Bay Area. I've talked to several of you when you showed up. I'm checking out Bay Area and getting some information. And somewhere in those conversations, the question is always asked, in some form or fashion, what can I expect from the Bay Area Church of Christ? And it's a good question, by the way. It's a legitimate question. It's the right question to ask. And I always try to answer that as honestly and transparently as I can. But somewhere along those conversations, the question has to be asked, okay, what can the church expect from you? Now, here's what you can expect, but what can the church expect? If you're a Christian, if you are a recipient of God's grace, what should God expect of you? Would it be to show up here every now and then when your week isn't too hectic? To give a little bit of money when you're feeling generous or guilty? To learn the words of some of the songs? To memorize a scripture every now and then? To volunteer for something if it doesn't, disrupt your schedule too much? To live respectable lives? To avoid very public, scandalous sin? Is that it? Is that all that, is expected of us? No, not at all. I think God's expectation for us can be summed up this way: 100% commitment to Jesus Christ. I think that is God's expectation for you. I think that's His expectation for me, to be wholeheartedly devoted to loving and serving and honoring Him and His Son Jesus. for me to place my time, my life, my resources, my relationships, my choices, my work, my mind, my obedience, wholly at God's will. So if you get nothing else out of the sermon, get that. That's what's expected of us. 100% commitment to Christ. Anything else, and you have failed to meet God's expectations for you. I've never seen a football coach interviewed and said, you know what we're expecting is a good 85% effort out of the boys today. No one ever says that. No boss ever says, well, here at the operation, we expect a good 2/3 day's work out of every employee. That's what we hope for, but that's not what the expectation is, right? I've never been at a wedding where someone said, with this ring I thee wed, I honor to love thee and be faithful to thee a pretty good chunk of the time. No, we don't like that, right? In those instances, we expect 100% commitment. God's the same. And yet I see people who have gone to church, sometimes for years, and they want to hear about grace. And they want to hear about God's unconditional love, but they don't want to hear about any kind of expectation on their behalf that would require them maybe to rethink their priorities, sacrifice their comfort, change their lifestyle, to give up a sin. I don't want to hear about that. Now, granted, some people love to hear those sermons. They don't change anything. They just feel better about their own judgmental attitude when they hear those things. But usually, we like to hear what we can expect from God. Not so much what He expects of us. But the simple truth is, God expects, in fact, God demands 100% commitment from you. As we think about this idea, I want to use as a backdrop King David out of the Old Testament. For almost a year on Wednesday nights, I have been going through a class on the life of King David. If you know me at all, you know my favorite Old Testament character is David, because he was such a character. But I want to share some things about King David. But before I get there, I actually want to introduce you to another king of Israel, a king by the name of Amaziah. Amaziah ruled 200 years after David, so they didn't overlap at all. But I want you to see what the text says about this king named Amaziah. It's in 2 Chronicles 25. Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Jehoiada. She was from Jerusalem. Then the text says this: he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not wholeheartedly. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not wholeheartedly. Today's English version says, he did what was pleasing to the Lord, but he did it reluctantly. Here's a guy who punched the clock, checked a few of the boxes, but his heart just wasn't in it. Which, by the way, is a miserable way to live. It's just a miserable way to live. Now, contrast that to what we read about David. All right, and take us to the New Testament when Paul is preaching in Antioch of Pisidia, and he says this in Acts 13. But God removed him from the kingship, talking about King Saul, the first king of Israel. God removed him from the kingship and replaced him with David, a man about whom God said, David, son of Jesse, is a man after my own heart. We all know that. If you don't know much of anything about David, you know he was a man after God's own heart. But look what else God says about David. He's a man after my own heart, for he will do everything I want him to. He'll do everything I want him to. In the Old Testament, David is referred to as a man after God's own heart. In the New Testament, David is referred to as a man after God's own heart. Now that statement gets a little bit confusing when you take into the fact that David was an adulterer. He took another man's wife. And then he murdered that man. And then he tried to cover up that murder. He was a train wreck of a husband, probably worse as a dad. But here's the deal. David's heart belong to God. His whole life is covered and consumed in his God story. What drives him is this overwhelming desire to serve God, to honor God, even when he messes up. And he messes up a lot. But then he repents, and he wants to get right with God again. David is 100% committed to God. And the question is, does God expect that kind of commitment from me? And that's the obvious question, right? I'll give you the obvious answer. Absolutely. God absolutely expects that kind of commitment from us. The harder question is, well, how am I doing? Where do I stand? Now, where am I on that commitment scale? Let me share with you a couple of application points when we think about this idea of wholehearted devotion. Here's the first. Wholehearted commitment to God means that I serve others. It's not just about knowing and reciting rules. It's not just about refusing to do the things that I shouldn't be doing. Wholehearted devotion to God means serving other people, helping other people. It means doing something. Dennis did such a great job of kind of fleshing this out this past weekend about what we do, the importance of what it is we do, initiating action. You think about the life of David and what he did for other people. David sees this Philistine giant who's taunting the Israelite army, saying, send somebody out to fight me. No one wants to fight the giant. But David knows that he serves a God who's been faithful to him. And he remembers when he was a shepherd that when a lion came or a bear came, God granted him victory over the lion and the bear. And David said, I trust God to grant me victory over this giant. So he goes to King Saul and says, I'll fight the guy. I will risk my life for God. I will risk my life for God's people. Years later, when David is king at great effort and some expense, he finds a guy by the name of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is lame. He's got issues. He's high maintenance. David takes him in, invites him into his palace, says, you're going to eat at my table for the rest of your life. Why? Because David made a promise to Mephibosheth's dad, his friend Jonathan. And David's going to serve Mephibosheth because of the vow that he made to Jonathan. And then later in life, as a king, David says, it's not fair that I'm living in a palace and God's being worshipped in a tent. I want to build a temple. God says, you can't build the temple. You've killed too many people. And so he gets his son to build it. Solomon builds the temple, but make no mistake, David made it happen. Then 200 years later, King Amaziah spends 29 years of his life doing what's right, but his heart was never in it. His heart was somewhere else. And if you read the story of Amaziah, what you'll find is a king who was very ungrateful. He was greedy. He was incredibly arrogant. And it ends up getting him killed. Amaziah never could grasp this concept of putting other people first. Listen, our expectation, if you're a member, if you're a part of the family of Bay Area, is that you serve someone, that you minister to other people. And that's what makes a church great. When you get people who say, I've got some talents, I've got some time, I've got some ability, I can do something. And as a family, people start doing something. That's what Jesus modeled. That's what God expects. Second idea. Wholehearted commitment to God means being passionately committed to worship. And we might struggle with the idea of passion from time to time. The passion comes in all kinds of forms. People who are wholeheartedly devoted to God are passionate about worship. They are serious about worshiping God. I'll take us back to David again. You see it so plainly in his life. David was a really complicated man. He's a really busy man. He was king of Israel, which meant he was leading the government, but he was also leading the military. He was a busy guy, a lot on his plate. But David loved to worship God. You see it so obviously in his life. He sacrificed his time, his energy, so that he could worship God. Over and over again, you see it in his writings. David wrote things like this: I will praise you, O Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonders. I will be glad and rejoice in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. That is not half-hearted devotion. On one occasion, we're told, you'll remember this, David is bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. And he's so excited for the Ark to be back where it belongs that the Scripture says that he danced before the Lord with all his might, with shouts of joy and sounds of trumpets. David is dancing before the Lord. And Michal, his wife, who happened to also be Saul's daughter, isn't impressed. 2 Samuel tells us, afterward, when David went home to greet his family, Michal came out to meet him. The king of Israel made a big name for himself today, she said. He exposed himself like a fool in the sight of the servant girls of his officials. David answered, I was dancing to honor the Lord. And then, just in case you don't know, who chose me instead of your father and his family to make me the leader of his people? And then David says, and I will go on dancing to honor the Lord. David honored the Lord with all his might. He did it through dancing. He did it joyfully. He did it through prayer and fasting, sometimes. He did it through writing, sometimes. He did it through meditation. There was nothing half-hearted in the way David worshiped God. I don't want there to be anything half-hearted in the way I worship God either. I don't want anything to be half-hearted in the way I honor God. And yet sometimes, if I'm real honest with myself, and probably you as well, sometimes I find myself worshiping more like Amaziah than David. Sometimes I'm worshiping, but I realize, my heart's not really in it right now. Kind of going through the motions. I know what I'm doing is pleasing to God, but my heart's not in it. Now, I guess we all know some CEO Christians, right? Christmas, Easter only. The CEO Christians show up, a couple times a year. David never saw God as someone who wasn't worthy of his daily worship. Worship wasn't something that David saved for one day of the week. He worshiped God with his life. And listen, everybody worships something. We all worship something. David chose to worship God, but all of us are committed to something. The problem is, a lot of times, we're not exactly sure what it is we're committed to, or we don't want to admit what it is we're committed to. We don't want to admit what it is we actually worship. So let me give you a way to diagnose the commitment problem. If you want to know what it is you're committed to, what it is you actually worship, just ask yourself this question. What do I get most irritated about when it feels threatened? What bothers me if I think I might lose it? What would I miss the most if it were taken away from me? Maybe it's, some substance. Maybe it's an addiction. But maybe it's just success, money, control. Maybe it's family. I worship my family. That's what would bother me the most if it was ever threatened. Maybe it's just comfort. I know people, and they would never admit this, but I know people, if you took away their TV and couch, they would feel threatened. I mean, there's a strong attachment there. Because I want to sit on my couch and I want to be comfortable. We all worship something. I'll give you one more thought on this point. David's wife, Michal, who criticized David about, the dancing and, taking his shirt off and all those things. I mentioned she was King Saul's daughter. She never saw her dad react like that. She never saw Saul worship God like that. She didn't grow up seeing that. She grew up with a dad who was more like Amaziah, who worshiped God half-heartedly when it suited him. She didn't see Saul doing the things that David was doing. Now I'll say this to parents. Your children need to see you committed to worship. And I don't mean just here, but I'm not excluding here either. Your children need to see you teaching them and living without the fact that this matters. My commitment to God matters. Our worship to God, it matters. And I say that because I know how easy it is as a parent to kind of slide into that, getting so focused on everything else. Education, how my kids doing in school, sports, making the team, all the clubs and all the extra things that they're in. And then we get pretty casual about their spiritual formation. You've heard me say this several times. You parents are the best chance your children have at falling in love with Jesus. You're not their only chance, but you are by far the best chance they have at falling in love with Jesus. We as parents, as grandparents, as spiritual family, we need to be very intentional about teaching our children just how committed we need to be to worshiping God on a regular basis. And then one last thought. Wholehearted commitment to God loves to be challenged. This is so true. I think it's telling. I think it's obvious. Fully committed people love to be challenged on what it is they're committed to. You see this in teams. You see this in companies. You see it in families, in the workplace. I think it's especially true in churches. I think it's true on the spiritual level. When somebody is wholeheartedly committed, not out of guilt, not because they're pressured into it, not because it's the expectation, but when someone is wholeheartedly committed to something, they love to be challenged on that commitment. They love to be called to it, to be renewed by it. When the bar of expectations is set really high, they love that. Love to be challenged. And they also love to challenge people around them. I mentioned that David wanted to be the one to build the temple, but God says, now you can't do that. So God says, your son will do it. And notice how David challenges his son Solomon when it comes to building this palace for God, temple for God. 1 Chronicles 28, and you, my son Solomon, acknowledge the God of your father and serve him with wholehearted devotion. There you go. And with a willing mind. For the Lord searches every heart and understands every motive behind the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will reject you forever. Consider now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a temple as a sanctuary. Be strong. Do the work. Notice David challenges Solomon a couple ways. First, he says he's challenged a wholehearted devotion. And then he challenges him, be strong. Do the work. For a devoted follower of Jesus to be challenged with Jesus' work, that should fire you up. That should kind of get your juices flowing. That's my wheelhouse, okay? I love that challenge. That's what I want. That's kind of my heart's desire, to do the work. Now you think of Jesus' commitment to you. Leaving heaven, coming here, living a perfect life, and then allowing himself to be crucified on a cross. We only get one shot at this thing called life. This is our only shot. Jesus is the only thing worth fully committing this one chance we have to. This is our one and only life. Only Jesus is worthy of committing that one and only life to him. Again, we love to hear about grace and healing and unconditional acceptance, God's love. We love to hear about those. And I get it, by the way. I love to hear about those things. You know, I love to preach about those things. But I don't want just that for us. I don't want us to be the kind of family who hungers for messages about how God is totally committed to us, but don't hunger to be challenged to be totally committed to Him as well. I don't want to be a guy who preaches sermons saying that God is totally committed to you 100% and then somehow give the idea that it's okay to be 80% committed to Him. I also don't want to give the impression that being totally committed to God is something that's going to be a burden. Oh, it's going to be so hard to do. And it's going to be unpleasant. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be a duty. No, not at all. In fact, being totally committed to God is just a natural response. It's just what happens. 1,000 years after David lived, 1,000 years after David danced before the Lord, Jesus told a story trying to explain some of these things, trying to explain to us what the kingdom is like. Matthew chapter 13. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then, in his joy, went and sold all he had and bought that field. This is a man who is wholeheartedly committed to something. He finds this treasure, and he doesn't say, oh, now I've got to sell everything I own. And it's going to be uncomfortable. But you know what? I'm going to grit my teeth. I'm going to bear down. I'm going to sacrifice. And everybody's going to know that I'm sacrificing. No. In his joy, he sold everything he had so he could buy the field. Why? Because he knew what was waiting for him. He knew what the payoff was. He knew what the treasure was. He knew where the treasure was. He wasn't making a sacrifice. This is common sense. It wasn't a burden. It was common sense. What Jesus is saying, in your joy, you be 100% committed to me. You commit to me 100% in your joy, and I will bury you in blessings. It's just common sense. When you understand what's waiting in the field, buy the field, okay? Whatever it takes. Buy the field. So, wrapping this thing up. What's God want from His people? He wants our heart. He doesn't want a piece of our heart. He doesn't want our heart sometimes. He wants our whole heart. He expects, He demands 100% commitment. Fully committed people serve others. They don't talk about it. They certainly don't brag about it. They just do it. Fully committed people are passionate about their daily worship to God. In fact, I would say that fully committed people are defined by their daily worship to God. Fully committed people love to be challenged on a spiritual level. Not from a sense of duty, not because it's just something we're going to make ourselves do, because it's common sense. In our joy, we're going to react with commitment. This morning, I just challenge you to be honest with yourself. Just completely honest with yourself. What are you committed to? Really, who are you committed to? What would it really bother you to see it taken away from you? See it threatened? What do you dream about at night? Where's your heart? Where's your heart? Is it more along the lines of King Amaziah? Well, I'm here, aren't I? Or is it King David? Man, what a blessing to be here. David is someone who longed for the heart of God. Flawed? Yeah. Sinful? Absolutely. Broken? In need of redemption? But he longed for the heart of God. His heart longed for the heart of God. This morning, where's your heart? We've got a song that we're going to use as a song of encouragement. As a church family, if we can minister to you in any way, come meet us at the front of the auditorium here.